My girlfriend, the lovely Julia, was playing her ukulele the other day. She does that a lot and she's getting really, really good on it. She was playing one of David Bowie's numbers. Is There Life on Mars? You know the one. I won't sing it. It'll send you mad if I attempt to do that. However, it reminded me of a television series of the same name, Life on Mars. And it was a detective series, but a sort of science fiction one. And it starred a character called Sam Tyler, who was a detective in Manchester, I think it was. And whilst he's going about on a case on the first episode, he gets knocked over by a car and is put into a coma. Well, he wakes up inside his head, as it were, and discovers he's in 1973 and no longer back in his current time of 2005, 2006, something like that, when it was originally made. And he discovers that he's still a policeman and he's got to solve crimes with a bunch of people. Of course, they don't know that he is from the future and he is bringing modern day practice back into the 70s. And he discovers that a lot has changed in those 33 years since that period. For example, one of the things he realises that when there's been an accident and an ambulance turns up, there are no paramedics on board. They're just simply the scoop up the body and take them to the hospital people and don't know the first thing really about medical intervention and keeping a patient alive en route. He's also within the TVs, and of course the other thing is there's no mobile phones and there's no computers and there's no internet, so everything's done by old-fashioned filing and telephoning and going to see people. And it's a fascinating look back, if you like, at how things were done in the 70s, somewhat dramatised, of course, for television. He also finds within the plot line that he's able to manipulate the past a little bit, that solves a few problems in the present, which makes it convenient for him, even though he's in a coma. Anyway, it's all fiction and we know that you can't go back in time, but it would be lovely. It did make me think actually how convenient that would be if you were able to nip back in time and have conversations with certain people and dissuade them from going on certain paths which were going to cause chaos in the future. After all, here we are in a strange world in which a number of things are happening which are a little bit odd, strange and confusing. We would love to go back in conversation with perhaps some of the leaders as they were growing up and dissuading them from, as I say, certain pathways, convincing them. Of course, some people might say there were a lot more harder tactics that you could enable to ensure those people perhaps weren't doing the things that they are doing now if they basically weren't around at all. And of course, I don't condone any of that, plus the fact we can't go back in time and do that anyway. However, it did make me think also that what we can do is we can influence the future. We're here now, and what's happening in this world, this crazy world, is what we can do something about today so that our future self can look back at and be proud of. After all, we all know what it's like if you think back to things you did in your youth and you think, oh, if only I had done such and such, or if only I hadn't taken that job, or if only I'd married that woman instead of this man, or whatever it might be. You know, we've all made decisions, and some of them good and some of them bad. Well, it seems to me that at the moment we could do a lot for our future selves so that it makes us proud, as I say. But what to do? That's the question. We're in a very odd world, and I don't really know the answers of how we can address some of the weird things that are going on. One of my jobs, I suppose, I've discovered from doing these talks is to ask questions. A lot of people get in touch with me and they put over some very spurious ideas that might be going on. I'm not saying any of these are not happening or that they are happening, but it's making me think about it and asking questions. For example, I'm constantly thinking about the last couple of years that we've gone through and thinking about things like the way we responded perhaps to the pandemic, thinking that that was really quite bad, you know, locking people up into their houses, causing them mental distress, causing children to be unable to learn properly because we were wearing silly masks. Things like the way that the whole country followed one science and was persuaded, the way that mainstream media, for example, only gave us one side of the argument, and that journalists, respected world-renowned journalists, were not questioning why we were following just one science and we weren't looking at a different science. And then when we had, for example, a vaccine, that why it was that we would only go in one direction, which seemed to be much bigger than we would ever do with any other vaccine, i.e. giving it to almost everybody that we could and persuading them to have it and cajoling them and making them feel absolutely idiotic if they didn't have it, when most people had no need of it to begin with. There was only small pockets of people. But why we would trust a science that would say this vaccine is good when it's been rushed through so ever so quickly, and yet normally a vaccine takes something from 3, 5, 10 years. We don't know the long-term effect of this vaccine, yet we were all lining up prepared to take it, which seems a little strange. We don't know how it will play out on pregnant women, for example, or the babies of future generations 5, 10 years down the line. We don't know that, so why would we put something into our body that we have no knowledge of how good or bad it is? And yet we made those decisions and we went with it. And the doctors, why did the doctors, who also have to follow the Hippocratic Oath and say do no harm, were not questioning the can't think of the word, the goodness, if you like, of the serum they were putting into it? They must know that normally a vaccine takes a certain amount of time, and it seems to me that they were taking blind faith that everybody else was doing it, and so it must be okay, and not actually asking questions themselves. So I think it's important to ask these questions and think about it. What right-minded person in a civilization would not do that, rather than just accepting what everybody else was doing? My job here, I believe, is to ask the questions and to try and get anybody who watches my videos to come up with answers themselves and think for themselves. And I think that's good for our future selves to be thinking about these things now. Now, a lot of people get in touch and they say, Richard, it's all very well talking about these issues that you've been talking about, things like the climate change and whether it's true and whether actually going to net zero is a sensible thing when we know that there's just not going to be enough generation for it, or indeed the business with the pandemic, as I've said, and other things that seem to be happening, the push for a digital currency and a global governments and things like that, and people being in charge of everybody's health. They may say talking about it is not enough. We need action. And that may be true. I don't know. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying that my role is simply to try and get people to think about it so that we're talking about it. Because clearly at the moment there is perhaps just us and other people who put on channels like this who are talking about it, but you walk down the street and it is as if a lot of people, and I mean a majority of people, still have their head in the sands and don't really think about these things. I know that I've been contacted by people of a religious bent who have sort of effectively outputted their worry to what I would think of is a mythological being. Now, I don't have a religious bent. I don't believe in God. I respect all of those people who do. Everybody's entitled to believe whatever they like, of course. But I would be worried if everybody's going to just simply say, oh, well, this deity will take care of it, will be all right. Maybe that's very comforting, of course. But if nobody actually does anything, then it may be slightly worrisome. I'm sure that in the past there were plenty of people who were praying to their deity terribly hard and obeying all the practices that their religion taught them, but have gone through some rather horrific situations. And we know that from history, that many people have been dealt with very badly, he says, as diplomatic as he can. So I think now we need to think about our future selves. What are we going to do now, and how are we going to get other people to see how we think, so that in the future there are more of us ready to do something when the time comes, whatever that might be. So think about your future self. That would be my thoughts at the moment. What can our selves today do to protect our future tomorrow?